Hello, I'm John Allure. Before you listen to this episode, a couple of things. These are podcasts from the first season of Who Killed Theresa. They haven't been heard in over 4 years. They're raw. It took me a while to develop a style. A lot of people like them that way, unvarnished. Others commented that it was amateurish. Nonetheless, here they are, unedited. I haven't gone back and listened to them. I haven't cleaned them up. Thanks for listening, and once again, life isn't fair, justice is blind and dysfunctional, and some cops aren't smart and dedicated like on television. This is Who Killed Theresa. Hi, welcome to the podcast. This is Who Killed Theresa, and I'm your host, John Allure. I got banned from a Facebook page this week. It's this page called Montreal Memories, and every city has one of these. It's where you can go and you can, reminisce about the good old days. And I've been a member of Montreal Memories for probably 10 years now. But the guy who runs it does have a rather strident restrictions about what you can and you can't post. For instance, it's fine to talk about the Montreal Canadiens or the glory days of the Montreal Expos and the Expo 67, the 76 Olympics, all the sunny ways things. But don't ever, veer into anything controversial like politics, or you risk being banned from the whole thing. I think I made the mistake once a number of years ago of posting something vaguely political, and I was promptly warned that if I did it again, that was it. I'd be out. And there's untold stories. There's so many stories about people just being exiled from this page for the slightest infraction. It's actually quite amusing. But if you want to talk about Vachon cupcakes and when you used to have milk delivered to your house, all that's okay. Let's remember all this stuff. And but this time around, I thought, you know what, I'm gonna try something. So I went to my website and I took one of the cases from Montreal that we've been discussing, and I just I posted it there and I said, isn't it time we were mature enough to talk about not only the good things that happened in the past, but maybe some of the bad things. And I said, if this is too controversial, just delete the post. I get the message. And sure enough, within about 3 minutes, it was deleted. But then I was just mad. And so knowing full well what was going to happen next, I then posted a message that said, Montreal Memories deleted our post about unsolved murders. It would appear we remain a shameful reminder of the city's past. And then for added emphasis, I hashtagged it Sharon Pryor, Lee Choquette, Jocelyn Houle, Catherine Hawks, Denise Bazinet, Lison Blais, Theresa Allure, Nicole Goudreau, and Tammy Leakey. All young women who died in Montreal or were from Montreal. And at that point, I was I was permanently exiled. I was sent into the cornfield for the rest of my life. Now, in one sense, I get this. As I said, every city has these. I follow one in Toronto where it's like, hey, remember when we used to have streetcars? And there's one for St. John, New Brunswick. It's like, hey, remember the old downtown movie theater? And I'm sure all of you living somewhere have these living nostalgia pages that's somewhere very similar. Then there's another one that I belong to. It's called People of the Eastern Townships. And we've talked about the townships. And, a lot of that is, look at this 1978 photo of a covered bridge. Isn't it great? And all of that stuff is great. But to their great credit, they are very tolerant about mixing the good and the bad. they will allow you know, me to post things about unsolved murders, and there's it might be a begrudging acceptance, but nobody goes so far as to delete them or to ban them. But in the case of Montreal Memories, I was banned, and I get it. We don't want to be reminded of the bad stuff. We only want to focus on the good stuff. But I think there's a real danger here, and I've been thinking about it a lot lately. And I sort of expressed it to somebody when we were turning all this over. You know, they were sort of like, why would they do this? And I said, I think they want a pleasant memory that absolves them from any responsibility from the horrendous crimes that occurred when they complacently stood watch and did absolutely nothing to address deep societal issues. And I not that everybody on Montreal Memories on some stupid Facebook page is responsible for these crimes, but I do think in obliterating your memory of them, that you risk it, a danger of being complicit. The great Shakespeare quote, "What's past is prologue," and you know, if you forget history, you're doomed to repeat it. Shakespeare didn't say that part. But funnily enough, as you know, we talked about this book, Murder City by Michael Arnfeld last week, and I'm more than halfway through it. And he talks in his book about the dangers of nostalgia. Recall that there's a series of murders that happened in a similar area that we're talking about, these murders in Quebec, only they happened in parallel in London, Ontario, Canada. And again, sort of a collective failure of the community to recognize what was happening, to face it head on. So I'm going to read from it's page 135, chapters that starts March of Time. The word nostalgia actually comes from the Greek nostos, loosely translated to homesickness, and until late 19th century was actually considered a mental disorder across Europe and the Americas. Characterized by a melancholic longing for a place and time, in effect what we come to think of as home, it captures a sense of loss of something that we think we had, but probably never did. The year 1969, through the afflictions of nostalgia, is still held up as the mantle of a simpler and happier or safer time by those who choose to cling to some very idyllic, but in most cases, fictional memories of that extraordinary 12-month period. In reality, as with most cases of nostalgia, these are people reminiscing about a past that never existed, an illusory time and place remembered only as they retroactively choose to remember it, not as it really was. The truth is that there was never a time when anyone was ever safe. And even with that, I'm also reminded of the great quote from the graphic novel Watchmen, Alan Moore's work Watchmen, and his quote on the past, which is great. He says, "The future looks a little bit darker, but the past, even the grimy parts of it, keep on getting brighter." Love that. So, the post that I made, the case that I initially posted on Montreal Memories, was the case of Katherine Hawks. And if any case should be remembered in Montreal for the impacts and influence of criminal investigative failures, it should be this one. So we're gonna add a new case this time. We're gonna talk about the death of Katherine Hawks and its relation to the other 7 cases we've already introduced. So the Hawks case occurs less than 10 days after the murder of Helen Monast in that little town of Chambly. And it happens just before the murder of Denise Bazinet, recall the woman who lived in the East End of Montreal and whose body was dumped halfway between Montreal and the eastern townships at Saint-Jean-Richelieu. And Hawks did not live in the same area as the cluster where Bazinet and Blais lived, which is the East End. Hawks lived in what is known as Cartierville, which is the north central area of Montreal, just before you cross the river into Laval. She was brutally beaten and raped while on her way home from her evening commute. And if the police had, effects of linkage blindness, the Quebec tabloids certainly didn't. They were quick to point out the risk and threat to public safety. The tabloid Allo Police in that era published the photos of Louise Cameron, Jocelyn Houle, Joanne Dorion, Helen Monast, and Catherine Hawks, all together in this article with the headline, Encore une manique sexuelle. So Catherine is the oldest victim we're going to talk about. She was 34 years old. And she worked in downtown Montreal at the corner of Dorchester and University. Dorchester nowadays was renamed René Lévesque Boulevard. René Lévesque being the first Parti Québécois leader to come to power. We talked, I think, about that last time in 1976. Ironically, I think when it was still Dorchester, Lévesque was driving home one night and he accidentally ran over a transient, and the guy died. And there was Rennie had been drinking that evening apparently, and Rennie's quite a colorful character. But they ironically enough, the street where he ran over somebody, they later called it René Lévesque Boulevard. But anyway, I digress. So she works in downtown Montreal, and she's on her way home, and she usually took a commuter train that would have deposited her at the Canadian National Val Royal station. But on September 20th, 1977, Montreal, and in fact the entire province of Quebec, experienced this massive power outage, and the electric trains were not running. So Hawks proceeded to take a bus home to Cartierville. And she left work at approximately 6 p.m., and the bus driver said he saw Catherine exiting the bus at the Val Royal bus shelter at approximately 6:20 p.m. Now, from the Val Royal bus shelter to her home on Rue Ranger Street, what she would have had to do is to walk north, go under a bridge that the train passed over, come back up, and then just she would need to just veer a little bit west, and that would take her, the street actually splits, and that's how she'd make it back to Ranger. So it was approximately a 4-minute walk away. But she never made it back to her apartment. So the next day, September 21st, 1977, around 5:30 in the evening, two students they're walking along the north side of the path by the railway station, and they smell what they described a gross odor. And they look in the bushes adjacent to where the train station is, and they discover the body of Catherine Hawks, and she's lying in some bushes beneath some trees. And they immediately call the police. So the Montreal Municipal Police arrive, so this is the first case. It's the second case where we're discussing the Montreal Police. The first being Liaison Blais. And the Montreal Police, they're sometimes referred to as the MUC Police, sometimes SPVM, and they're going to be central to this whole story in terms of criminal investigative failures. So when they arrive that evening around 6:30 p.m., and these times are extremely significant, they find Hawks lying on her back. And because it had been cold that day and it had been very windy the evening of the blackout, the body was very rigid. Her clothing was found approximately 5 feet from the body. You will recall that in the case of Louise Camera, the clothing was also found approximately 5 feet from the body. And 15 feet from where the body is found, the police find a white bag and a brown bag containing hair rollers and a tube of Pepsodent toothpaste. Hawks is lying approximately at 100 feet from the Val Royal train station, which would have been up an embankment, and 400 feet north of the main route, which is Henri Bourassa Boulevard. They do an autopsy. Hawks was found wearing a beige sock on her right foot, and her bra was pulled up over her arms. Objects recovered included a necklace and a ring, so the jewelry was left. And results indicated that Hawks was beaten violently about the head and raped. But she died from a combination of her injuries and exposure to the cold that evening. And that too is significant. Now, I'll remind you, the other beating we talked about is the other Montreal case, the case of Liaison Blais, who was walking home and was attacked just outside of her parents' residence. And in that case as well, he was beating about the head. So going on about Hawks, and first of all, a lot of my information it's pulled from the original police reports and public records. I didn't get it from the newspapers. And what I got was, when I made a public information request, was a treasure trove of information. And when they gave me the public records, the Montreal Municipal Police had inadvertently included all the police information. And I bet they're regretting it today. Now, unlike many of the other cases, Katherine Hawks has received a lot or some media attention. And in particular, in 2003, Radio Canada television, there was a television show called Justice avec Simon Desrivages, and it profiled the Hawks case. And here's where things get a little convoluted. At that time, by the time we moved to 2003, the Hawks case was now under the jurisdiction of the RCMP, of the feds. I'm going to speculate on why. The place where she was found was a train station, and the land that the train station was on, the trains were federal. It was a federal jurisdiction. So I imagine for a while they had the logic that it now had to go to the RCMP because she was found on federal land. So now we have a second force being introduced here. Again, more multi-agency confusion. So anyway, the lead investigator in the 2000s for the RCMP was Michael Hennigan, and he made a lot of noise. He was unlike in other cases. he was really trying to shake things up and draw attention to this. And the 2003 investigation, I want to give credit where it's due, was actually the impetus came from a relative of Katherine Hawks named Nancy Hawker. And she's the one who really kind of pushed for them to do this. And along with Michael Hannigan, they were able to get this television show made. The most interesting thing that came out of that television show was apparently the night of Hawks's disappearance, shortly after 6 o'clock, the killer telephoned into the police to tell the police that there was a body near the Val Royal Cartierville train station, and that somebody needed to come and do something about it. I don't know if this is an act of remorse after the crime, but there it is. So the police the RCMP had this tape, which had been called in to the Montreal Police's headquarters the night of the crime. And the RCMP asked for anyone who recognized the voice to please call in. And the person actually called into the police twice. And I'm going to now play that tape for you. And just excuse the background music. I couldn't eliminate that. That's from the original Radio Canada broadcast. They felt like they needed to give it a dramatic underpinning, as if the actual caller's voice wasn't horrifying enough.
Oui, monsieur, voulez-vous prendre note, s'il vous plaît, que je viens d'attaquer une femme au coin de Bois-Franc et Henri Bourassa, dans le sous-bois du côté nord-ouest. Oui. Merci. C'est à quel endroit qu'on vous rencontre? Dépêchez-vous, monsieur, j'ai peur pour sa vie. Merci. Oui, bonjour. Je viens d'attaquer une femme sur le coin de Henri Bourassa et Grenet, à Ville-Saint-Laurent, dans le sous-bois du côté nord-ouest. Avez-vous bien compris? Non, est-ce que vous voulez répéter, s'il vous plaît? Je pense que vous avez bien compris, monsieur. Sur le coin de Grenet et Henri Bourassa, à Ville-Saint-Laurent, dans le sous-bois du côté nord-ouest. La femme est encore là? Merci.
So I'll give you a rough translation of what the anonymous caller says in that call for those of you who don't speak French. The first call is as follows. I attacked a woman at the corner of Bois-Franc and Henri Bourassa in the bushes to the northwest side. Hurry, sir, I'm afraid she might die. Thank you. And then the second message. Yes, hello, I attacked a woman at the corner of Henri Bourassa and Grenet, in Ville-Saint-Laurent, in the bushes, at the northwest corner. Do you understand? I think you understand well, sir. At the corner and Henri Bourassa, at Ville-Saint-Laurent, in the bushes at the northwest corner. Then the operator says, the woman is still there? And the caller says, thank you, before he abruptly hangs up. So we'll discuss a little bit about the content in the message in a second, but before we do that, I want to circle back and kind of give you the context of the call. So this was aired on the Radio Canada program Justice, and clearly the RCMP in the 2000s was making some effort to get the public engaged, hopefully for someone to recognize this voice, so that they could bring some resolution to the Katherine Hawks murder. Then around 2010, something curious happened. For whatever reason, the authorities decided that the case was better if it was in the hands not of the RCMP, but the Montreal police. So it was handed back in 2010, sometime around there, to the Montreal police. So we have the changing of hands 3 times. It starts as an MUC SPVM case. It's given to the RCMP because they say it's federal jurisdiction, federal railroad, and then in 2010 it's handed back to the Montreal police. Now at that time, the existence of the tape gets wiped. The Montreal police will no longer grant access to the anonymous caller. The copy of the episode Justice on Katherine Hawks disappears from the internet. You can no longer access it, and even beyond that, public requests, media requests to Radio Canada to release that specific episode are denied. All other episodes of Justice anyone can get, but for some reason unknown, this episode is now restricted and no one is allowed to watch it or hear it. Now, the only reason I know this is due to a curiosity. It just so happens on that episode of Justice, it was actually a 3-part program dealing with 3 different cases. The first was Katherine Hawks. The second segment was on my sister, Theresa Allure. And then the third segment was on the Canadian serial killer, William Fife. And because I had been involved in the making of that program, I knew the producer with Radio Canada, Jacques Taschereau. And because I knew him, he's the one who told me, well, no one is allowed to see this. And he said, I don't know why. And I said, well, if no one can see it, can I at least hear it? Can I at least get access to that recording? I think it's very, very important and it needs to be out there. So he managed to get me just the spliced segment of the audio tape, and in 2016 I released it on my website, and now you can find it in various places actually on the internet. So the question you might ask yourself is, why was the Montreal police so reluctant to release this information? Didn't they want to solve this crime? And very clearly, the reason they didn't want it out there is because of the implications it had for their own criminal investigative failures. So recall that I obtained through a public information request. I obtained the not only the autopsy report on Hawks, but also inadvertently some police reports were included as well. And in that police report, the calls are documented. The first call is acknowledged in the police report, although it doesn't give a time that it was called in. But the second call does have a documented time. It was received at approximately 10:35 p.m. at Station 10 there in Cartierville. Now, why is this important? Well, because if the police knew at 10:35 p.m., the night Katherine Hawks was attacked, where she was and that she was attacked. In fact, they knew earlier because there was an earlier call. We just don't know how much earlier. Why did they wait 20 hours until two young men called in when they smelt a stench odor in the bushes by the train station? Why did they wait 20 hours to go out and try and find Katherine? And that's the trick of it. There's the problem right there, isn't it? Now, I asked this question and was given a rather feeble answer by the Montreal police. They said they, in fact, did go back that evening to find Katherine's body. But because of the blackout that had occurred, the power failure, it was too dark and they were not able to find the body. And then to that I say, that is a crock of shit. That's what a flashlight's for. And clearly, from the caller's words, he's very specific of where the body is. It is a postage stamp sized piece of land that they had to search. It did not require a lot of effort. I don't believe they even went out. There's no way, because I've visited that site, and it's in plain sight, a few feet from the road. It wouldn't have taken much effort to try and retrieve her. But even if that was true, it begs the second question. Okay, so the sun rises at 6 a.m. So why did they wait a full 12 hours from the time of daylight until 6 o'clock that evening to bother to go out and find her? And this is critical stuff, because we know from the caller that he says, his words are, I'm afraid she might die. So the guy who attacked her, having, for some reason, feelings of remorse, it's not uncommon in serial murders, has a moment of remorse and phones in and says she might die. So we clearly know that when he called in, at least the first time, whenever that was, Katherine Hawkes was alive. And we also know that the murderer wasn't solely responsible for her death. Yes, she had blunt trauma, as the autopsy report tells us. She had blunt trauma to the head, partial strangulation, but that, in conjunction with exposure to the elements, is what killed Katherine Hawkes. And the exposure to the elements component was wholly preventable had the police taken the time to go back in a diligent fashion and try to find Katherine Hawkes. Her death was preventable, and her death is in part due to I believe, criminal negligence on the part of the Montreal Urban Police Force. Funnily enough, in this morning's Montreal Gazette, the lead story is allegations of Montreal police corruption are troubling. This, according to the Justice Minister Martin, or to the Mayor Coderre. The story involves two whistleblowers who were going to go public and then were quickly discharged. They talk about evidence fabrication, etc., etc. For those who live in Montreal, there is nothing that surprises you here. Montreal has been dealing with corruption in its police force for decades, from Hawkes right up to now. Here's the story that police fabricated evidence that I'm looking at right now, and then in addition to that, there's the attempted murder trial of a young, in the case of a young female, 11-year-old girl who was strangled with her skipping rope, this happened in May of 2013, and promptly after the incident, as they were preparing to go to trial, the Montreal police force lost or destroyed 17 pieces of evidence, including the skipping rope and the young girl's dress, which had evidence on it, and they chalked the entire thing up to inexperience and mistakes. But again, nobody in Montreal would be surprised by this. Remember when we were talking about Canadian homicide clearance rates, the MUC police were the lowest. They had a 65% clearance rate, which meant that 35% of all Montreal homicides for a period of about 3 decades went unsolved on average. Again, people who live in Montreal, this is not new to them. But if you're new to the Montreal police, I'd urge you to do a couple of things. Google Officer 728 Montreal. Google Montreal Police Pants and see what you come up with. I think those 2 items speak for themselves about just how serious this police agency is in operating with integrity and with a willingness to do their jobs. So back to the phone call, a couple of things that are very interesting about this. At the time, the newspaper was kind of screaming about this sexual maniac out there, crazed guy on the loose. And one of the newspapers even warned that police should check all the local mental institutions because obviously a crazy patient had escaped. But if you listen to that voice, this guy is very measured. He's a very detailed person. I sent the recording to the Sûreté de Québec to Marc Lapine at the Cold Case Bureau to get his opinion on it. And his remark was, the voice is, I quote this, the voice is a very organized guy, he said, which is very interesting because in a lot of these, you talk about organized, disorganized offenders. We'll talk a little bit about it, but a lot of these offenders that we've already talked about and we'll talk about, the MO is very organized. There's only a few where it's more chaotic in nature. Yeah. And anyways, we've already said it, but police waited 20 hours before responding, and then Katherine Hawks died. There was clearly a chance to save Katherine Hawks, and this is no doubt why the Montreal police removed the tape from their website in the recent era. So just a few other things before we move on from here. DNA. In addition to sperm samples, the autopsy revealed that Katherine had 3 strands of hair clasped in her hand. And the 2003 TV show Justice also suggested that police still had that DNA. And the relative of Katherine, Nancy Hawker, actually followed up on this in 2016 and sent me a copy of the correspondence she had with an officer named Serge Messier. And in responding to Nancy Hawker, he says, I've done some reading in the file of Katherine Hawks. All the information that was brought to our division was checked out, and all the people that were mentioned in these information were talked to, and their voice was checked with the recording in the case. None of them were a match. A total of 8 pieces of information were received up to the year 2011. I cannot answer for what was done at the time of the discovery of the body in regard to what addresses were visited and which ones were not. Investigators at that time made choices according to the elements in their possession. None of the elements in possession of the investigators were conclusive in regard to any analysis made by the medical lab, and they do not reveal any more elements that could further the investigation. Rest assured that if any more information in regards of the case comes up, it will be dealt with. So, typical police response, and it's like, yeah, how can you be working on solving a case if you won't even let the the public know that the case exists. You remove the tape from your site. You guard information like a closed box, and then you turn around and wonder why you still have an uncleared case on your hands. Completely frustrating, but not an atypical experience in these affairs. So now I'd like to go back and kind of bring Hawks into the context of the other 7 cases we talked about. And before I do that, I will acknowledge it's now that we have 8 cases, I'm reading this book, Murder City, and every 5 pages seems to drop another dead body. And Michael does a very good job of allowing you to kind of follow things, girl killed Halloween night. That's the Halloween girl kind of things. And there are photos which certainly help you. I realize you guys are operating totally by my any indication I can give of character through a narrative telling of this information, which can be difficult. So I'll do my best to kind of link each one as we talk about them. Theresa lore is obviously ground zero. Louise Camera, recall, was the cadet girl from the Eastern Townships, body found in the woods. Manon Dubé was the child, dressed fully clothed in winter gear. Lison Blais was the other case from Montreal. Remember, she had been out at a disco and attacked in the back entrance to her parents. Denise Bazinet, the young woman also who lived close to Lison Blais and was found equidistant halfway between Montreal and Sherbrooke. Sharon Pryor, the brutal attack of a 15-year-old blonde girl in Pointe Saint-Charles, Montreal, in the island of Montreal. Helen Monast, that's the girl who was found in the little village of Chambly. And then finally, Katherine Hawks we have. And so some of what I'm getting is this book, Murder City, again, I keep referring to it, by Michael Arnfield, is very instructive and informative, and I'm learning a lot of things. And some of this that I've kind of noticed is he talks about a phenomena called paraphilia, which is kind of the characteristics of, for lack of a better word, what gets an offender off. And what he notices is if it is not atypical where you have bodies found outside, outdoors, for that person to be a peeper, somebody who exposes himself, somebody who's quite comfortable in that element of kind of snooping on people, stalking people, observing people in a public forum. Also, this notion of organized versus disorganized killers, and some of the elements of an organized killer he cites as being highly mobile, who regularly have access to a vehicle, follows the police investigation in the media. Victim is a random stranger or a targeted stranger fitting a certain preference. Use of restraints and seeks dominance and compliance. Possible captivity of the victim, and victim's body transported and concealed. Now, we can see in a number of these cases that some of these, and these aren't the only elements, but these are the elements that I noticed certainly have a commonality in some of these cases. I never want to talk about the idea that my sister might have been held for a period somewhere, but nevertheless, that could very well have been there was 5 months between when she disappeared and where she was dumped. And it's similar in the cases of Louise Camera could have been held captive. Certainly, she was not killed where she was found. And as well, Manon Dubé, the child, could have been held captive. Sharon Pryor most certainly was. But in the other cases, not so. The other ones were kind of immediate opportunities, kind of snatch and grab kind of situations. And that's Lison Blais, again, followed home, attacked in the backyard. Helen Monast, attacked in that little park just after leaving work. And Katherine Hawks certainly just kind of attacked on her way home from the bus station right there. And in some ways, these crimes describe a disorganized, possibly a disorganized offender. Some elements of the disorganized offender that I found possibly applicable here is anxious or panicked during the crime. And I get that from the phone call by the anonymous tipster. Lives near the crime scene, attacks at a location that could very well be in this little cluster we're talking about. Limited mobility, has no immediate access to a vehicle. Crime is spontaneous and opportunistic. Attack is sudden, explosive, and excessive. And that did remind me of a lot of the Montreal cases. Although not completely. It could be this is that the offender changes up his modus operandi according to the environment he's in. So it may not be that the offender doesn't have a car. It's just in the cases, when he's in Montreal, he doesn't need a car. And then certainly in the Monast case, kind of potential of a mixed offender between organized and disorganized. Yes, it happened in a close locus from where she left work and where she was found. But as we noted, I don't think the offender is from the little town of Chambly. I went back and looked at the size. I think it was 10,000 people in 1977, 78. I just, again, I can't see how you keep a secret that long in a town like that. I do think it was somebody, summer town, vacation town, somebody driving through, took the opportunity and then quickly left. Something else that Michael Arntfeld, discusses, and I never knew this, that the riskiest occupations for women are model, nurse, and waitress. And I found that very interesting. Louise Cameron worked up at the hospital. Jocelyn Houle, who we've not gotten to, was a nursing student. She wasn't from Montreal, but she was in Montreal at the time of her death, taking a special course on cardiology. Joanne Dorion, who we haven't talked about yet, worked in the hospital. In fact, she worked at the Cartierville Hospital, which was just adjacent where Katherine Hawks disappeared from. And then a couple of these victims were also waitresses. Helen Monast was working at the little restaurant across the street from where she was attacked in the park. Denise Bazinet was a hostess at Saint-Hubert Barbecue. And then a couple other elements to drop in there to summarize some things here. So in some instances, we have very clear rape. For instance, Sharon Pryor and Louise Cameron clearly have what is said sperm in the vagina. Monast there's no evidence of sperm, but I believe in that Chambly case, Monast, the offender was interrupted and didn't fully finish what he intended to do. The Helen Hawks case notes the presence of sperm, and we don't know if that is internal or just simply on some of her clothing. Bazinet is just says it's a sex crime. Lison Blais is noted as a sexual aggression, and then of course in Theresa Delors' case, we don't really know, but we suspected. She's found in her bra and underwear that there is a sexual element to it. And then that leaves us the last one, the child, Manon Dubé. And This is the outlier one. This is the one where we say, well, we don't know. She was found fully clothed in her snowsuit. The only item missing was a red mitten. Law enforcement over the years have always been quick to suggest to me and to anyone who will listen, the fact that she was found in her clothes proves that Dubé wasn't sexually assaulted, to which I respond that demonstrates an incredible lack of imagination. It is not unknown, particularly with young victims, that offenders will redress them after they're finished having their way with them. So I would call into question the assumption that Dubé wasn't sexually molested. We know for a fact that Sharon Pryor, Louise Camara, and Helen Monast were found lying on their back, and there may or may not be some staging in the crime scenes as well. I have some crime scene photos, but a lot of that stuff is restricted. Only the police know. It doesn't mean the other victims weren't found on their back. We just don't know. In the case of Louise Camara, again, the military cadet, she had her coat covering her. Again, in some cases, demonstrating remorse, that the offender feels remorse for what they did. And then very curiously, we don't, a lot of these victims are wearing their jewelry. Camara, Monast, Bazinet, my sister Theresa Laure, were all wearing their jewelry, the Timex watches, earrings, etc. We have the very curious matter of shoes, and I think this is pretty important for these cases. So Sharon Pryor, the young Pointe Saint-Charles girl, she's wearing her shoes. Louise Camara is missing her boots, and yet the bootlace, we presume hers, is found around her neck. Hence the term that I started, bootlace killer. Helen Monast, her shoes are placed neatly near the corpse, and the shoelaces are missing. In the Hawks case, the shoes are missing. Denise Bazinet is wearing one shoe, and of course, in Theresa's case, the shoes were never recovered. Well, none of the clothing, but the bra and underwear she was wearing was recovered. And then, what of the clothing, the placement of the clothing? And again, this is compelling stuff. Sharon Pryor, Pointe Saint-Charles again, clothing scattered all over that beekeeper area, underwear hanging in the trees, very chaotic. In Cameron's case, the cadet, clothing piled 5 feet away, like as in the Hawks case, clothing piled 5 feet away. Clothing is scattered off that off-ramp in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu in the Bazinet case. Clothing piled in the Lison Blais case, the attacked outside of her parents' house, and clothing missing in Theresa's case. And then finally some curiosities. Camera is the only, apart from the bootlace, she's wearing one glove. In the case of Hawks, there's one sock on her foot. Manon Dubé is missing one glove. And then finally we have the matter of wallets and purses. So Sharon Pryor leaves her home to go to a pizzeria in Pointe Saint-Charles, and she leaves her wallet at home. Camara, we know, was missing her wallet or her purse because they couldn't identify her for so long, so it was not at the crime scene. Helen Monast was missing her purse. Katherine Hawks, missing purse. Denise Bazinet, missing purse. Of course, in the case of Dubé, we don't know, but she's a young child. Lison Blais is, again, the most talked about purse matter we've talked about, missing the purse, and a purse is recovered matching her purse's description near where Louise Cameron was found. And then finally, Theresa Lore's wallet is missing but is eventually recovered. You know, my initial instinct with these things was, well, of course the identification is missing. The reason you take the purse or the wallet is to give yourself some time. Cops are going to take longer to identify what initially is a Jane Doe. The offender can put some additional time and tracks between themselves and the murder. However, it should also be noticed that is very, very common for purses and wallets to be taken as trophies, as a memento for the sexual predator to cherish and to relive the experience, the fantasy. And so I think in these cases that possibility cannot be ruled out either. I want to end things now with a few housekeeping issues. Number one is on my website, all the maps have been destroyed. Destroyed. That's not it. They've been restored. For a brief time, they were destroyed. I had created these crime maps very simply using the photo app Picasa, but then Google stopped using Picasa, so everything was wiped. And if you clicked on a link to go to a map where you might see, a picture of the victim and, geographically located, you just go to a 404 page. I've done my best to restore everything, but if you run into one of those 404 dead links, just communicate with me, and I'll do my best to get it back up. That's the first bit of information. I will post links to anything that I feel you need some kind of pictorial or more information on that we've discussed here from this episode. And then finally, I, in addition to all the other ways you can communicate with me, at Justice Guy on Twitter, Theresa Lore at gmail.com. I now have I have a Facebook page because someone told me I should get a Facebook page. So if you like engaging on social media with Facebook, we're out there. It's just called Who Killed Theresa, the podcast. But since we're talking about fake Facebook pages, let's circle back to where we began. My being banned from the Facebook page Montreal Memories, and also I got all kinds of listeners here from very intriguing countries and cities: Sweden, the Netherlands, Australia, Japan. Wouldn't it be neat if some of you, in guerrilla fashion, all went onto Facebook and go ahead and ask to join the website Montreal Memories. And, once upon approval, since you cool cats in Japan don't really have any interest in Montreal Memories, here's what you can do. So upon being accepted into the group, immediately post on that site, who killed Lisanne? Who killed Sharon? Who killed Katherine? Who killed Denise? Now you will be immediately banned from the site, but you know what? You'll be doing a service. You'll be doing a service to justice and social media responsibility. So that is my charge to conclude this episode, to totally get under the skin of the Montreal Memories people. But they should. I mean, in all seriousness, this is this is a page that has 19,000 followers, of people who now or at one time had an association with the island of Montreal. Wouldn't it be great if, shouldn't we be trying to engage them and seeing if any of those people know anything about these cases? It makes sense to me. In this day and age, social media is in many ways possibly the only way some of us engage with people. Some people don't even go out anymore. So as much as I find, Facebook a little silly, it would be important to reach them. And I know you're not going to reach them. You're just going to get banned. But you know what? It's the thought that counts. And it would be great for all these people from different countries to be making these attempts. So that's my silly conclusion here. This has been Who Killed Theresa. I'm your host, John Allure, and have yourself a great evening.